A while back, I had a conversation with a Greek person, Greek American, concerning immigration, European immigration, and immigration to Europe. And it came out eventually in the course of the discussion that this fellow resented the fact that a large number of non-Greeks, non-Europeans, or non-acceptable Europeans had immigrated to Greece, legally or otherwise, in the last few years, and he didn't like the idea that this was taking place. I'm not going to criticize him for it. I think that it is disorienting to people, regardless of whether or not it's the nicest emotion out there. It's kind of a human emotion to have, this kind of xenophobia, a suitably Greek word, or at least a little bit of it. He would say that yes, Albanians, various undesirable European nationalities like Romanians, Bulgarians, a few Russians were now crowding into the cities of Greece. Whether or not they actually are crowding in is a matter of opinion. Plus Arabs, Africans, this kind of thing. I think that this tendency is something that's taking place in Europe in general, and it kind of has a lot of people uneasy. And it's difficult to discuss because the second you open your mouth about it, somebody's hackles are raised and someone's angry. Well, I pointed out to this Greek fellow, what do you think about the Greek diaspora in North America or Australia or whatever? He's quite proud of how well the Greeks have done. And I said, well, okay, does this not strike you as a little bit inconsistent? You don't like the fact that that there are other non-Greeks immigrating to Greece, but Greek people emigrating overseas is perfectly acceptable and something to take pride in. Kind of, he didn't like that, but I can see where he's coming from. In a way, I'm kind of calling the fellow a hypocrite, even though I'm criticizing him for something that is a pretty human feeling to have. And this kind of tendency is common, I think, throughout the Western world, or throughout the world in general. A large number of us have come from backgrounds where we sort of have a history of being the victim. I grew up in an Irish Catholic background. My family never really taught me this. We never really thought that the English or the British were out to get us, but a great number of Irish North American people have this feeling, that the British have always persecuted us. This doesn't stop an Irish Catholic in Canada or the US, or I'm sure even in Ireland, from being racist against non-Irish people. It doesn't seem to occur to people that there's some sort of inconsistency here, that our culture should be respected and we shouldn't be persecuted for being what we are, but we reserve the right to dislike other cultures. Once again, I'm not criticizing anyone for this kind of point of view. I think that it's a natural thing, but I think that it's something that people really ought to have a look at and see what where the inconsistencies are in their own position. Because I know in Canada, at least, at the time of the Great Famine in the middle of the 19th century, it was a reasonably neatly run little colony with good Protestant, mostly actually Scottish, not English settlers. And then suddenly it's flooded with all these semi-literate, disease-ridden, unemployable Irish peasants. That's kind of an overstatement of what actually happened, but it was a disorienting thing, and it left this kind of anti-Irish feeling in Canadian society that only went away, say, by around the 1960s, or perhaps even later. So there was all kinds of objections to the Irish. They were drunks, oh my lord, they were Catholics. They didn't want to assimilate. They wanted to remain Irish people. They didn't want to become Canadians. They deliberately stayed apart. They married among themselves, and they tended to be belligerently proud of who they were. Now this is kind of an accepted part of the Canadian and I think American fabric. It's kind of one of the accepted building blocks of our societies. I should not be at all surprised if it was the same way in New Zealand and Australia. Now, as we as the Irish have integrated into Canadian society and become essentially just white Canadians like any other, in as much as outward appearances are concerned. We may have taken on the same kind of attitudes as the people that rejected the Irish when they first arrived, i.e., oh yes, we're not really sure about all these new immigrants arriving, and we don't like the fact that they stick to their own, they practice their own culture, they marry among themselves. Wait a minute. Does this sound familiar? So it's an interesting thing where it's okay for me to believe that I'm being persecuted for what I am, and I'm sort of proud and beholden to the sacrifices that my ancestors went through in order for me to retain my cultural identity here in North America. But any new arrivals aren't to be accorded the same right. So the inconsistency inherent in this kind of thing, I think, is fairly glaring. And I don't believe that white people are the only ones that are guilty of this. I think this probably goes for anyone, any race on earth that has a culture of immigration or emigration. There's say a Chinese might be proud of how well the Chinese Canadians have done in Canada. By the same token, he may have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder about the way that the Chinese were originally treated when they arrived in Canada, and it was pretty bad. They were treated fairly badly, to be perfectly honest. But by the same token, if his daughter comes home with a black boyfriend, he might have something very negative to say about that. So I don't want to say that white people are the only people that are like this. So I think that anyone who actually dislikes someone else's culture or sees it as a menace to one's own ought to at least look at the way one's own culture is seen from the point of view of someone else, and how one's own culture is seen as a positive menace to that person's culture. We're all guilty of this, so there's no point in pointing fingers at anyone. And as I say, it is a human emotion to have. But I think that if we sort of are a little bit conscious of it and a little bit self-critical, I think that we can at least blunt the edge of this probably increasing tendency in human society towards cultural and ethnic disorientation. Thank you.